understanding of South Asia, South Asian politics, Islam, radical Islam, movements with Islam, international relations, and other topics. In 2018, in the run-up to Bangladesh's election in that year, we realized that in 2014, Bangladesh's Jamaat-e-Islami student wing had been one of the most violent groups in the world in that year, essentially trying to intimidate their opponents, kill their way to power, and had done massive damage. And we didn't want it to happen again. We worked with a few of the very few other people in America that understood this issue to get a resolution introduced to counter this and to point out who these people were. And so in the run-up to the election, should this kind of thing happen again, to make sure people knew what was happening. Congressman and soon-to-be Senator Jim Banks introduced this resolution. You probably know Jamaat-e-Islami as Modudi's Islamist network founded before India's partition, which was very active in both East and West Pakistan before they were split into Pakistan and Bangladesh. And you probably know that they were perpetrators of the Bengali genocide in 1971. But Jamaat-e-Islami did not stay in South Asia. It exists globally, including in the US and in Europe. To me, most predominantly, although not exclusively, it is the Islamic Circle of North America, or ICNA, as it is usually called. There are other organizations, the Muslim Ummah of North America, and various subchapters of these groups, such as Helping Hands for Relief and Development, ICNA Relief, and others. This is just in America. There are more in Europe. ICNA is simply a branch of Jamaat-e-Islami, a major one. This is not seriously disputed by anybody that knows the region or knows the topic at all. Moodudi himself visited their opening event in the late 70s, wrote probably the authoritative book on Jamaat-e-Islami in English, and he openly refers to ICNA as one of the major branches of Jamaat-e-Islami in the world. John Esposito, a prominent academic from Georgetown, also refers to Islamic Circle of North America as a Jamaat proxy. The only time this is challenged is in a highly technical sense when ICNA finds itself in trouble for being too close to terrorists, and they try to, get away from things that they otherwise would be close to. But nobody seriously disputes this. ICNA, or Islamic Circle of North America again, is known to be closer to the Pakistani branch of Jamaat-e-Islami, but that is not a hard and fast rule, and they get involved in Bangladeshi politics as well. And also, Ashraf Fuzzaman Khan, a leader in Jamaat-e-Islami militia group in Bangladesh, who was convicted and sentenced to death by a war crimes tribunal in Bangladesh, is the former ICNA vice president. After this happened, he is believed to move out of the US. Last I heard, he's living in Pakistan. But the point is, a very high-ranking officer in ICNA was a Bangladeshi war criminal. There are other things that show how clearly their interests align with Bangladeshi Jamaat. When Mukhtar Rahman Nizami, another convicted Bangladeshi war criminal, was sentenced to death for leading the Al-Badr terror squad, current president of Islamic Circle of North America, who was also their former chairman of two of their other branches, as well as a leader in other Islamist organizations, a guy by the name of Mohsen Ansari, a Pakistani origin doctor, openly mourned for him on his social media accounts. And Islamic Circle of North America gave him a posthumous Community Appreciation Award after he was executed, to show you where they are going. Another person that mourned Nizami's passing was Turkish President Erdogan, who tried very hard and very openly to prevent his execution. Another organization that I mentioned that is trying to shape Americans' perception of Bangladesh and of events in South Asia, Mohammed Nektar Rahman is a prominent board member and spokesperson for MUNA and the close friend of Mohsen Ansari, the Islamic Circle of North America's current president. He is the son of a war criminal in Bangladesh. My point being is that these groups exist. They are active, they have many chapters, they are well organized, and have every incentive to paint the Bangladeshi government, the Awami League, and Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh in a particular way. Generally, the way they view these things is not how I think is in the best interest of my government and my country, and not in the best interest of the people of Bangladesh either. They have every incentive to amplify the sins, real or imagined, of the Bangladeshi government and the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina. They have every incentive to downplay the role of Islami Chakra Shabir for their violence in 2014. A London-based barrister, Abdur Razak, before resigning for Jamaat-e-Islami, visited DC frequently to make the case for Bangladeshi Jamaat. Toby Cadman, who is registered as Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh's lawyer, has been active in doing the same thing. He just recently, a few days ago, put out a statement decrying the Bangladeshi government for keeping Jamaat-e-Islami from contesting elections, saying that it was driven by the need to repress anything seen as political dissent. And I could go on and on. There is a huge ecosystem in the US, both from domestic Islamists as well as Bangladeshi, projecting their power directly into the US via lobbying and such to shape the narrative in a certain way. I will never forget a time when I had just started working on these issues. I attended a briefing on Capitol Hill in the House of Representatives office building. Human Rights Watch, a left-wing NGO, was in attendance, and John Sifton, Human Rights Watch director for Asian advocacy, openly criticized Bangladesh for banning what he called the Jamaat Party, an act he deemed undemocratic. Knowing a little bit about the history of Jamaat-e-Islami, I was shocked. I fully understand the inherent difficulties and risks in disqualifying political parties from participating in the process. Making democracy work is difficult. An actor in the so-called democratic process that does not hesitate to get involved in violence is not dedicated to democracy. And to have an influential organization like Human Rights Watch that cannot even be bothered to mention that the Jamaat Party, in their words, was part of a genocide that literally killed millions and had engaged in mass violence only a few years ago, and not even bothered to bring this up as a context, I knew something had gone deeply wrong. And it has. And that is, I think, some of the source of problems with US policy towards Bangladesh and the wider South Asian region. Let me take a step back now and talk about the wider issue of Islam in America. Islam in America is not new. It is hundreds of years old. Currently, there are an estimated 3.45 million Muslims in America, or about 1.1% of the population. It is roughly tied for third after Christianity and Judaism, roughly tied with Hinduism and Buddhism. And the vast majority of these Muslims have no political agenda, significantly different from Christian, Hindus, Buddhists, or any other of their fellow Americans. Most do not get involved in politics beyond voting. However, it is simply accurate to note that the most involved and most organized Muslims tend to be Islamists. Groups like ICNA are a prime example. When I say Islamists, I mean a Muslim who believes that Islamic law, as they conceive of it, should be imposed on everyone, regardless of religion, by the state, and that they take actions to make that happen. That can be done peacefully or through violent means. We view Islam as a religion not that different from others. Well, Islamism, which is unique to Muslims but is not all of Islam, is a threat not only to non-Muslims but to the majority of moderate Muslims. Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood is probably the most prominent example of a modern Islamist movement and organization. And of course, Muslim Brotherhood thinkers were in close touch with Maududi when he started Jamaat-e-Islami. Most Bangladeshis, most South Asians, I think of most stripes, have no sympathy for this kind of thing. But that's not the impression, and that's intentional. They want to create the impression that anybody that criticizes radical Islamist, Jamaat-e-Islami, or that is supportive of the Bangladeshi government, for example, is all actually going after American Muslims writ large, that they are Islamophobic, that they hate or fear Muslims. This is a powerful idea, particularly in the US, where bigotry is a very real concern by the public at large. They are opposed to it and they want to live in peace with their neighbors of all stripes. However, this concept is weaponized by Islamists who attack anyone who opposes their goals. But as applied, it is almost always to attack those who criticize radicals And even governments that are majority Muslim, Bangladesh, UAE, are often accused of Islamophobia. Absent effective opposition, this narrative often works. It certainly works far more often than it ought to. And currently, the opposition in South Asia lacks the scale of the Islamist lobby. And it's not just organizations that are weaponizing this narrative. Shall we say, unfortunate policies or misguided ways of looking at South Asia and Bangladesh in particular. And let's be honest, Bangladesh is an imperfect young democracy. It has struggled to become a democracy in the sense that we would like it to be. I'm an American. I have watched this happen in my own town just a few miles from my house in January 6, 2021. And there's reason to fear that this kind of thing could happen in Bangladesh. I know one observer in Bangladesh, in the State Department, that is sympathetic to the Awami League and the current government, that said he thought the 2018 election, in his words, was overcooked, meaning that, in his view, the Awami League had clearly and legitimately won, but that there had been shenanigans, for lack of a better word, from some of its supporters. My point in saying this is not to demonize the Bangladeshi government, nor the Awami League, nor Sheikh Hasina, but to note that some of the concerns by people in the State Department or around Washington are not totally irrational. My issue is to what degree ought this to drive U.S. policy. This is the debate that is skewed by the Jamaat-e-Islami's activism and lobbying and the activism and lobbying of their friends. All countries fail to live up to a perfect democratic ideal, and a majority are not even democratic. So the best is to figure out what to do, relatively speaking. In my view, a violent theocratic movement like Jamaat-e-Islami has not been seen as a legitimate political party, particularly not when they are engaging in mass violence just a few years ago. But the entire Jamaat-e-Islami lobby in the U.S. And their supporters is aimed at flipping that perception. By painting the Awami League's excesses as equal or worse than that of Jamaat, they aim to refocus the debate. U.S.'s decision in late 21 to apply sanctions to the Rapid Action Battalion, or RAB, in Bangladesh is a perfect example of what I'm speaking of. As I'm sure you know, RAB was founded by the BNP, Jamaat-e-Islami's now partner, and was in power, and was widely popular due to problems with the usual Bangladeshi police, as well as the urgency of fighting terrorism. They were invited to train in the US and the UK, and the Biden administration's decision to sanction them was, in the words of Ali Riaz of the Atlantic Council, unprecedented. It was done in the name of fighting authoritarianism. Senators that had asked for sanctions against RAB didn't even ask him to go as far as he actually did. But it's worth noting that it was reports by Human Rights Watch, the same organization that could not be bothered to mention that Jamaat-e-Islami was a key player in the Bengali genocide in 1971. They were one of the groups shaping the narrative around RAB, and a key part of painting them as being worthy of sanction. I lack the expertise and, frankly, the intelligence to know the depths of the problems, and in terms of what the intelligence community would know about the depths of the problems with RAB. Elite police forces can be abused, and I find it plausible they have been. However, what concerns me is the lack of focus on Jamaat-e-Islami and their terrorist arms and their terrorist friends. At minimum, the U.S. policy should take those equally into concern. If they have done so, I have seen little evidence of it. And I've seen a lot to indicate they focused almost exclusively on the real or perceived misdeeds of the RAB, and not at all on the violence and radicalism of Jamaat-e-Islami and their allies. It seems to me much more steps could have been taken to understand the nuances and to have a more fair policy before going this. I would argue, for example, that placing sanctions on Pakistan's ISI would have made a lot more sense. They've gone far, 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 far worse, in my view, than RAB ever could, yet that's not even contemplated. The more recent visa restrictions in Bangladesh, in theory, apply to opposition actors, but in practice, they seem aimed solely at the Awami League. There is little indication such sanctions work to modify the behavior of the government. I don't think that the Biden administration is out to topple the Hasina government. But I do fear they are taking the side of the Islamists and will have negative ripple effects for both the US and Bangladesh. One not need to think that their concerns are totally legitimate to realize that they are functionally taking the side of the worst actors who present an even worse problem than some of the actors they seek to punish with little awareness of this fact. It is not in the best interest of the US or democracy rightly understood to empower elements that clearly have no interest in real democracy, except perhaps as a means for gaining power by which they will ensure to maintain power perpetually. Jamaat-e-Islami is such an actor in my view, and US policy, as driven by domestic Jamaat-e-Islami actors and their friends fellow travelers, fail to recognize this problem. And I think that's a problem for both of our countries. Again, I don't feel that US policies are by and large drawn out of malice. I believe they are instead born out of mistaken impressions and an aggressive effort to paint a particular narrative without the full facts. To the degree our Indian and Bangladeshi partners can provide a more complete picture and call attention to why certain facets are being overlooked, aka the Jamaat-e-Islami lobby and their friends, while acknowledging the legitimate concerns of those in government, I think the US can chart a better policy for itself and for the South Asia region. Thank you very much.